In this video, we're going to look at coterminal angles. Coterminal angles are just angles that have the same initial and terminal side but may have different measures. Let's take a look here. So here you can see the green section is showing us a 90-degree angle. So coterminal angles for that would also be negative 270 degrees and 450 degrees. So if I started here and I rotated in the negative direction, I would go 90 degrees, 180 degrees, 270 degrees. Also, if we started here and we went all the way around the circle, that's 360 degrees, plus another 90 degrees would take us back up here, which gives us the 450 degrees. So coterminal angles are really just going to come from adding and subtracting whole circles. Come back here, let's just take a look at this quick example here. So here we have a 40-degree angle. So if I have 40 degrees and I subtract a whole circle, which is 360 degrees, we get negative 320 degrees, which is this rotation here. Remember, when I'm going in this clockwise direction, that's a negative angle, so that gives me negative 320 degrees. If I go for the 40 degrees and I add a whole circle, then that's going to give me the 400 degrees. So that would be starting here and going in the positive direction, so counterclockwise, all the way around and then back another 40 degrees. So that gives me the 400 degrees. I can continue to add and subtract whole circles to any of these numbers and we'll get additional coterminal angles. So coming back here, to find coterminal angles, we're going to add or subtract whole circles. So remember, if you're working in degrees, that's 360 degrees, or if you're working in radians, that's 2 pi. So let's say just on this example that we have here, let's say alpha here is 3 pi over 4. And then I want to find the negative rotation that is equivalent to that. So here we're going to go 3 pi over 4. We're going to subtract a whole circle, which is 2 pi. So here we need to work with some common denominators. So 3 pi over 4 minus, and then 2 pi is going to be 8 pi over 4, because 8 over 4 gives me 2. So then 3 pi minus 8 pi gives me negative 5 pi over 4. So 3 pi over 4 and negative 5 pi over 4 are coterminal rotations. So the positive rotation of 3 pi over 4 or this negative rotation of negative 5 pi over 4 are going to both get me to this terminal ray here, assuming that we're starting from that initial position. If instead, let's say I'm working with degrees, so let's make this 45 degrees. Here I want to get another positive, so I'm going to go all the way around, which since I'm working in degrees here is 360 degrees, and then rotate again that 45 degrees. So here I'm just going to take my original angle, 45 degrees. I'm going to add that whole circle. So this is going to give me 405 degrees. Okay, so if we look at some examples here, we need to draw the ray for the given angle and then find a positive and negative coterminal angle. So remember, when you're drawing your angle, I would go ahead and put your axes in, because always we're talking about doing the rotation from that starting position. So this first one's 30 degrees. It doesn't have to be perfect, but you just need to be in the right quadrant and approximately in the right spot. So hopefully you know 45 degrees is in the middle of the first quadrant. So here I'm just going to say this is 30 degrees here. So 30 degrees, so that's my terminal ray. And then I want to find a positive and a negative coterminal angle. So I'm going to start with my angle, which was 30 degrees. I'm going to add a whole circle, and I'm going to get 390 degrees. So if we went all the way around the complete circle one time and then continued another 30 degrees, we would get 390 degrees. If we go 30 minus 360 degrees, that's going to give us negative 330 degrees. So that would be starting here and going in that clockwise direction, and then around to my terminal ray. So 30 degrees, 390 degrees, and negative 330 degrees are all coterminal. Here we have negative 150 degrees, and if you recall, negative angles are just reflections across the x-axis. So if you can imagine where 150 degrees and then would be, and then just reflect it over the x-axis. So we know this is 180 degrees, so 150 would be just short of that, so just above that, and then I'm going to reflect across the x-axis, so I would be here, and then I'm going to reflect across the x-axis. So I'm actually going to end up in quadrant 3. So this rotation, remember, it's negative, so I know I'm going in the downward direction first, so I'm going in that clockwise direction, and that's negative 150 degrees. So now if I go negative 150 degrees and I add a whole circle, we're going to get 210 degrees, so that would be this rotation here. If we go negative 150 degrees and subtract a whole circle, then we get negative 510 degrees. And again, that would be doing a complete circle in the negative rotation direction and then back to my terminal ray. Okay, so over here we're working with radians, so this is why it's important for you to know that 16-point circle and be able to visualize where those radian measures are as well. So remember, this is pi over 2, 2 pi over 3 is approximately here, so you're going to be in quadrant 2. So this is 2 pi over 3. And then we're going to find the two coterminal angles. So I'm going to go 2 pi over 3. So remember, now a whole circle is 2 pi. So this is going to be 2 pi over 3 plus 6 pi over 3, which is going to give me 8 pi over 3. So again, this would be going all the way around the circle and then back to the 2 pi over 3. And then again, we'll go 2 pi over 3 minus 2 pi. So 2 pi over 3 minus 6 pi over 3 is going to give us negative 4 pi over 3. So that would be starting here and going down first and then around to my terminal ray. Couple more examples here. These are examples where we're starting with values that are beyond one complete rotation. So we have to do a little bit of work probably before we can actually draw in where the ray would be. So this first one, we're starting with 490 degrees, which is bigger than a whole circle because we know a whole circle is 360. So if we do 490 minus 360, we get 130 degrees. And then that's a little bit easier for us to visualize because we know this is 90 degrees. We know this is 180 degrees. So 130 degrees would be somewhere about here. So 130 degrees. The 490 that they gave us originally would be this rotation. And then we want to get a negative coterminal angle. So I'm going to use the 130, not the 490 this time. So when you want to change signs, you want to use the smallest possible angle. So 130 minus 360 again. And we get negative 230 degrees. So that would be this rotation here. So we could have added a whole circle to the 130, but that would have taken us back to the 490. So sometimes you just have to decide if I need a specific sign for a value, then we just have to keep going in whatever direction. Okay, on this next example, we're starting with negative 5 pi. Again, we know that that's bigger than a whole circle because a whole circle is only 2 pi. So I have a negative value. So here I'm going to start with 5 pi and I'm going to add 2 pi. To that, so I'm just adding a whole circle. So that gives me negative 3 pi, which is still bigger than a whole circle. So I'm going to go negative 3 pi. I'm going to add that 2 pi again, and now I get negative pi. And again, that's a little bit easier for me to visualize, so I know that's actually this right here. So this is negative pi, and I'm ending up my terminal ray is actually on the axis. So need a positive rotation, so we're going to just keep going here, and I'm going to take that negative pi plus 2 pi again, and that's going to give me a positive pi, which would be this rotation here. So negative 5 pi, negative 3 pi, negative pi, and positive pi are all coterminal. We just had to keep going so that we could actually get that positive value. Again, here I've got negative 9 pi over 2, so 9 over 2 is like 4.5, so I know that's bigger than a whole circle. So I'm going to add a whole circle to that. So that's going to be negative 9 pi over 2 plus 4 pi over 2, which is going to give me negative 5 pi over 2. 5 over 2 is 2.5, so again, it's too big, so I'm going to keep going. So negative 5 pi over 2 plus 2 pi, or 4 pi over 2, is going to give me negative pi over 2. So I've got the negative 9 pi over 2, the negative 5 pi over 2, and the negative pi over 2 are all coterminal again. So my rotation is this, negative pi over 2, and again, I'm going to be on the axis for my terminal ray here. And then I still need another positive coterminal, so I'm going to go negative pi over 2 plus another 4 pi over 2. It's going to give me 3 pi over 2, which we know is this rotation here. So I got a bunch of different coterminal angles there, but I had to keep going again because I was required to give a positive and a negative value. Okay, a slightly different sort of example here. If you are given two angles, we have to decide if they're coterminal. So your process here is going to be to make sure that both angles are positive values within one complete rotation. So between 0 and 360 or between 0 and 2 pi. So you want to get your values between 0 and 360 degrees or between 0 and 2 pi. So you want them to be positive and within one complete rotation, and then you're just going to compare them. If they're equal at that point, then they're coterminal. If they're not equal at that point, then they're not coterminal. So if we start over here at this first one, we have 510, obviously bigger than 360, so I'm going to subtract 360 from that, and I'm going to get 150 degrees. 450 again is bigger than 360, so I'm going to subtract, and I'm going to get 90 degrees. So now both of these are between 0 and 360 degrees, and they're positive. So now, since they're not equal, we know that they are not coterminal. Okay, so looking at B, I've got negative 210 degrees. So that is between 0 and 360, but it's negative, so I'm going to add 360 to that, which gives me 150 degrees. And then I'm going to take the 870 degrees. That's bigger than 360, so I'm going to subtract 360, which is going to give me 510, which is still bigger than 360, so I'm going to do 510 minus 360 again, and I'm going to get 150. So now here we've got 150 degrees, 150 degrees, so these are equal, therefore coterminal. So just looking at some practice with the radian values. So here I've got negative 7 pi over 3. The radians with the fractions are a little bit harder to deal with. So just use your calculator and check. So negative 7/3 is negative 2.3 repeating. So that is bigger than a whole circle. So we're going to add a whole circle to that. So we're going to add 2 pi. So negative 7 pi over 3 plus 6 pi over 3 is going to give me pi over 3. That I know is between 0 and 2 pi. 5 pi over 3 is between 0 and 2 pi. So I've got 5 pi over 3, and I've got pi over 3, and these are not equal, therefore not coterminal. Okay, last example, 7 pi over 4 is between 0 and 2 pi, so I'm going to leave that. Again, if you're not sure, just do 7 divided by 4 on your calculator. You get 1.75, so 1.75 pi is between 0 and 2 pi. 23 pi over 4, hopefully you realize, is not between 0 and 2 pi, so we're going to do 23 pi over 4 minus 2 pi, which is really going to give us 23 pi over 4 minus 8 pi over 4, which gives us 15 pi over 4. Still bigger than 2 pi, so I'm going to keep going here. So 15 pi over 4 minus 2 pi, which is 8 pi over 4, is going to give me 7 pi over 4. So this is between 0 and 2 pi, so now I've got 7 pi over 4 and 7 pi over 4. So these are equal and therefore coterminal.